But anyways, starts and sits for week 16. Help the people out. I think everyone's basically in the playoffs at this point, or about basically everyone's in the playoffs. Like this should be playoff time for your
Yeah.
fantasy league. So go ahead.
All right. So starts and sits of week 16. Crazy to think that we're already this far into the NFL season. But a crucial week, if you're still alive in your playoffs, either your playoffs are just starting or you're now in week 2 of your playoffs. That's how most leagues should be operating right now. And it's a crucial week. Last week there was a lot of COVID stuff. This week there is two guys like Travis Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, Taysom Hill, a lot of fantasy relevant players that are not going to be playing this week. And who knows, the list could continue to grow as we get closer. But starting with the starts, and I say this every week, I'm not going to tell you to start guys like Jonathan Taylor, Alvin Kamara, the obvious players. Those guys need to be in your lineup regardless. So these are players who are more on the bubble. Maybe you're questioning starting them. Maybe you have, somebody on your COVID list, then you need to replace somebody. These are guys who can fill into those spots for this week. So starting at quarterback, Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals. He had his best game of the year against the Ravens earlier in the season. They play the Ravens this week, and this time they're without Marlon Humphrey and Deshaun Elliott, two of their starting defensive backs. So it seems like a pretty shut and closed case that honestly they should continue to do the same thing. Wink Martindale, the Ravens defensive coordinator, was asked about potentially doubling or tripling Jamar Chase like they did Devontae Adams this past week. And his answer was, well, Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Famer. Devontae Adams is a top 2 receiver, and he's not 2. That was his response. So he's saying, no offense to Jamar and Joe, but they're not those guys, which is true. I wouldn't say Joe's even close to Aaron Rodgers. I wouldn't say that Jamar is really even close yet to Devontae Adams. I think both guys have that potential. But at the same time, last time you played them, those two shredded you. Like Jamar Chase, I think that was his best game of the year as well. So we'll see what happens. But if that's his mentality, wouldn't be shocked if those guys had a big game again. So Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase is not on this list because he's sort of one of those players that, despite his slowing down over the last few games, I can't imagine you have like 2 or 3 options that are better than him on your team. If you do, good for you. You have a sack team. Anyway, next quarterback, and this is a caveat, assuming he's able to play, and that's Tyler Huntley from the Baltimore Ravens. Same game, and this is if Lamar Jackson is not good to go. I really like Huntley in this matchup. He just balled out against the Packers. The Bengals don't have a great defense. Huntley's running quarterback, so he provides you running value. He could steal some touchdowns from Devonta Freeman and Latavius Murray. Both Freeman and Murray haven't necessarily been reliable the last few weeks, and so having a guy like Huntley, he knows who his best target is, and that's Mark Andrews. He's going to feed him, and that just turns into easy fantasy points. And if this game goes as expected, I think they're going to be playing from behind, which means they're going to have to be passing the ball a lot more and more desperate on offense, which is what we saw against Green Bay. And it actually almost worked in their favor to where they were really able to get the offense going. So I would start Tyler Huntley. If he's not good to go, this is someone who's not going to be on the post just because I don't put 3 quarterbacks, but I'm going to put Tyler Huntley there. If Tyler Huntley is not starting, I really like Matt Ryan this week. They play the Lions. That's pretty self-explanatory. Just really bad defense. So Matt Ryan, if Tyler Huntley plays, he's second start. If he doesn't, Matt Ryan. Moving on to running back, Sony Michel from the Los Angeles Rams. People started to worry that when Darrell Henderson returned from injury, how are we going to see the split between him and Sony Michel go? Sony Michel played about 70% of the snaps on Tuesday against Seattle. And I said this earlier in the year. I didn't expect it to take this long, but it seems like with the Rams, it always takes them long to find the running back that's going to be the guy. And it happened with Cam Akers last year. And now I feel like it's unfortunately happened to Darrell Henderson again. But I feel like Sony Michel is going to win this job because he's just been incredibly impressive. He doesn't necessarily have to be the guy, but he knows his role in this offense and he can produce on the ground. And so Sony Michel, I would start him this week in a game against Minnesota, whose run defense has just not been very good against fantasy running backs. They had an okay game last week against David Montgomery, but for the most part, over the last 2 months or so, they have not been very good for opposing fantasy running backs. Next, Miles Sanders from the Philadelphia Eagles. This is pretty self-explanatory. The Eagles run the ball a lot. Miles Sanders has been getting a lot of carries. Shockingly, Sanders has 0 touchdowns on the year. I think this is the week that changes. They play the Giants. The Giants, I mean, they shut down Daniel Jones for the rest of the year. It seems like they're kind of throwing the towel. Hey, we're done. We're last in the division. We're not going to make the playoffs. It's over for the Giants, and I feel like we might see that out of their team a little bit, especially if this game gets out of hand early. So I would start Miles Sanders because it's just such a run heavy offense. He's getting a majority of the workload too over the last couple of games. Next at wide receiver, this one's a little surprising because I don't really love the passing attack for the Carolina Panthers, but it's DJ Moore. They play the Buccaneers, and the Bucks are just really good at stopping the run, and so I think at some point that's going to force the Panthers into passing mode. And DJ Moore, unfortunately, his production has not really followed, but he has an absurd target share at like 32% on the season. And that's sort of elite numbers that you really want to look for when it comes to a wide receiver for fantasy. And so I don't know. I just feel like this is a sort of game where they're going to have to pass at some point, and maybe he busts off a big play for a touchdown or a big reception, something like that. And even then, he's still getting involved in the passing game no matter what. He's still getting like 4 or 5 catches a game, 40, 50 yards, something along those lines. So I think he has a safe floor, but has a pretty big boom potential just because of the matchup against Tampa this week, which also Tampa's defense isn't very good against receivers for fantasy purposes. They're good in real life, but in fantasy, they allow receivers to put up a lot of points. Um, Next receiver, Odell Beckham Jr. from the Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Kupp is an obvious start, but they play the Vikings, whose secondary is just very poorly graded. They just simply don't have a lot of talent back there overall. The Vikings on the year, I mean, against fantasy receivers, have been one of the worst defenses. One of the best defenses for a receiver to face in fantasy, just because they have good safeties. They have, solid linebackers. They're good against tight ends, stuff like that, but they're just really bad against opposing wide receivers. And they give up a lot of, potential splash plays. And so I don't know. I just have this weird feeling that this is one of those games where it seems like Sean McVay has sort of been like, I don't want to say like force feeding Odell in certain spots, but it seems like when they get like close to the red zone, Odell's one of those emotional players that if you really want to like get him going and you want to make sure that he's ready to go like late in the game, maybe you just throw him a couple passes in the red zone, let him score a touchdown, get excited, get mentally focused and into the game, and there you go, he's ready to go. And so I feel like this is just one of those games where they could easily throw a couple deep balls to him, maybe a touchdown, something like that, and he can get a solid, double-digit performance. And the final wide receiver of the week is Amari St. Brown from the Detroit Lions. He's been killing it in the slot. If Jared Goff plays, Jared Goff has really been force feeding him ever since TJ Hawkinson got hurt. And so I don't know. I just love Amari St. Brown this week because of the matchup. I know he plays the Falcons, who have AJ Terrell, who another guy who's probably a Pro Bowl snub. I mean, it's tough because the NFC has a lot of great corners, but a lot of people were complaining that he was snubbed from the Pro Bowl. But AJ Terrell really just stays on the outside on his specific side, to where Amari St. Brown gets moved around in the slot, on the outside, sort of everywhere for this Lions offense. And they just don't have a lot of playmakers. So Amari St. Brown, being arguably the most talented right now, I like him this week in fantasy. And he's been on a hot streak, so that helps too. And finally, at tight end, Cole Kmet from the Chicago Bears. They play the Seahawks. The Seahawks have been pretty bad at guarding tight ends this year. No Jamal Adams, who he oftentimes was a guy who would guard tight ends for them. I mean, Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner are solid, but I don't know. Cole Kmet has just sort of slowly become one of Justin Fields' favorite targets. I believe he was the one who caught that late touchdown on the last play of the game last week. And so I feel like if there's anybody in this Bears offense who has a pretty safe floor and the ceiling to have like a 20-point outing, it would probably be Cole Kmet, because he has a solid matchup against Seattle, and also Justin Fields seems to really like him. And tight ends are just sort of that safety blanket when you get under pressure. Carlos Dunlap can have some solid performance against this Bears offensive line. So maybe Cole Kmet just gets some quick passes here and there as the safety blanket. Moving on to the sits of the week. First off, this one's pretty obvious. I don't know why you'd be starting him anyway, but if you're in a 2-quarterback league, maybe you are, or you're in one of those like crazy deep leagues, like 14, 16 teams. Big Ben from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just once again, the choice by the coaching staff to limit Chase Claypool's snaps over the last few weeks has sort of eliminated their big target, who can be the big downfield threat. He's still there, obviously, but he's just there less and less. Deontay Johnson is solid, but outside of him, Pat Fryermuth is dealing with injuries. Najee Harris is solid, but there's just not a lot of options for Big Ben to get big plays, especially against the Kansas City defense that has been very good over the last couple of months. And so I know that Justin Herbert and that offense was able to have success last week, but this isn't Justin Herbert and this isn't the Chargers. I know that Najee Harris is very talented. Deontay Johnson, very talented. Both players very similar in volume and production to like a Keenan Allen and an Austin Eckler, but Big Ben is just not Justin Herbert, and so I don't expect him to be able to put up that level of performance that the Chargers were last week. Next at quarterback, Derek Carr from the Las Vegas Raiders. We saw it last week against the Browns. Not a lot of weapons. No Darren Waller still. Just what are you going to do offensively? I don't know. And against the Broncos defense, that's pretty good. I don't expect that to really improve this week for Derek Carr. So I don't like the matchup here, and I simply just don't love what they have offensively outside of like Hunter Renfrow. Next at running back for the Sits, Myles Gaskin from the Miami Dolphins. They play the Saints. The Saints, I think, defensively are going to be a little desperate just because they're playing with Ian Book at quarterback, and that's no shot at Ian Book, but there's just sort of this understanding with the defense that when your backup quarterback, let alone your fourth string quarterback, has to play, that you need to step up and you need to be a force in this game. I think they're going to be able to do that this week against the Dolphins. And we know the Saints' strength has been their run defense. And so Myles Gaskin at running back, he can get involved in the passing game. How much? We don't know because Duke Johnson had a really good performance last week as well. So just don't know about the volume that we're going to get out of him. And I don't know. I don't love the matchup against the Saints for Myles Gaskin. Next up at running back, Chuba Hubbard for the Carolina Panthers. Another self-explanatory one. They play Tampa. Tampa's run defense is really good. I feel like this is more of if you're going to run, it's probably Cam Newton. If you're going to run, maybe you have like a run pass option so you can pass out of it. Maybe you audible out of it. Maybe Amir Abdullah plays a lot of the game because he's the guy who's been getting the receiving work out of this backfield. So I just don't love the volume potentially for Chuba Hubbard in this one. And if he does get volume, I don't love the potential production against Tampa. Next, at wide receiver, it's Chase Claypool. This one just comes down to the decrease in volume. I think he has the big play potential, but I don't like that it's Big Ben that's going to have to be throwing the ball. Big Ben just hit or miss. And also, once again, as I talked about, Chase Claypool has seen a decrease in snaps. He was starting the year, he was up in like the high 80s, low 90% when it came to playing snaps, and now he's down in the 70s. I don't know if it's punishment related. I truly just don't know the answer as to why. So I'm not going to try and figure it out. I'm just going to say I wouldn't start him unless you really have to. Next at wide receiver, Terry McLaurin against the Dallas Cowboys. The last time they played, surprisingly, Trayvon Diggs was not necessarily trying to intercept the ball. He was more so just trying to play solid coverage and prove people wrong that he can be good in coverage. And he was having success in this game last time. I mean, obviously there was only 2 passes to Terry McLaurin's way before he got hurt against Trayvon Diggs, but he was 0 for 2 on those. Didn't catch a single pass in the entire game. And then at halftime, right before he got that concussion, was ruled out. And so this is one of those games where Taylor Heineke could be under siege the whole time against Randy Gregory, DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons. His offensive line was not able to hold up last time, so I don't expect that to change. And Terry McLaurin on the whole year has just unfortunately been pretty hit or miss. Either he blows up and he has a top 10 performance, or he just doesn't do much at all. And I just feel like against the Dallas defense that is really hitting their stride, I wouldn't start him. Next, Michael Pittman for the Indianapolis Colts. Plays Byron Murphy, who actually statistically for fantasy has been one of the toughest corners for wide receivers to go against. I think he has one of the best stats. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I was reading somewhere. I believe it's like 0.6 points per catch or per target for wide receivers that he's guarding, and he just doesn't allow a whole lot of targets. And so, in a game and an offense where they're going to run the ball a lot, I just, once again with the Colts and with any offense that's just so run heavy, it's tough to start the receivers, especially in the playoffs where you really need somebody to perform. If the volume's not there, that's going to be a killer. And they only completed 5 passes last time. They only threw 12. I just don't love what we're seeing volume wise for Michael Pittman this week against the Cardinals. So I'm going to say I wouldn't start Michael Pittman. And finally, at tight end, this is someone who was he was the sit of the week the last time that they played the Patriots. It was Dawson Knox from the Buffalo Bills. He had a few drops, so he could have had a better performance the last time they played. But simply put, Bill Belichick is amazing against tight ends. I'm not going to go on the whole spiel that I went on last time when it came to all the crazy stats for Bill Belichick against tight ends over the last 3 years. But he's amazing against them, and he knows who your favorite options are at different parts of the field. And he knows that Dawson Knox is one of Josh Allen's favorite red zone targets, and so he's going to try and take him away. That's not going to change this week. So I wouldn't start Dawson Knox. If you want to know all the in-depth stats behind the logic there, you can go find the sits from the last time they played them, I think 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago in like week 13 or 14. And you can see all the in-depth stats of Bill Belichick and the Patriots against tight ends over the last 3 weeks or the last 3 years. Sorry. It's pretty absurd and will make you be very scared to start Dawson Knox. So those are the starts and sits of the week. Obviously, if you have questions that aren't related to a lot of these players, you can hit us up on our socials. We have our Instagram and TikTok up there, mainly post on our Instagram, but you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere. And if you got a start and sit question, you can feel free to comment it there or leave it in the comment section of this YouTube video. We will try to respond to you as soon as possible. It is fantasy playoffs, so we will try to be as active as we can. And I want to throw this reminder out. These are always just suggestions. I know a lot of people will come back and be like, I started this guy and he didn't do very well. It's a suggestion. Go with your gut, especially, and I'm saying this because it is the fantasy playoffs. If we say to sit a guy and you feel like he's going to blow up, always trust your gut over, potential other accounts and so-called experts, because no one truly knows. Anybody can blow up. Anybody can have an off game. So in the playoffs, trust your gut over everything. But these are our suggestions.
All right. So that'll do it for this episode. We'll be back with reactions next week, like John mentioned. And otherwise, best of luck to everyone. And if you're doing fantasy playoffs or if your team's just playing this weekend, which every team's playing. So best of luck, unless you are a Browns fan.